Standing in my doorway at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening, my parents smiled expectantly as they announced they had sold the family home to fund my sister's business venture and were moving in with me temporarily. 7 oversized suitcases surrounded them on my apartment hallway carpet, while my father held keys to a house that no longer belonged to them. What they did not know was that I had already signed a lease on a tiny studio apartment across town and would be moving out the following morning. Their faces shifted from confident expectation to complete bewilderment as the reality hit them that their golden child's revolutionary business had already collapsed spectacularly, leaving them homeless with nowhere else to turn. The weight of their situation crashed down on all three of us as we stood frozen in that doorway moment. My mother, Susan, clutched her oversized purse against her chest, while my father, Harold, shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other, clearly unprepared for any response except immediate welcome and gratitude. "Just Dina, sweetheart, we know this is sudden." My mother began, her voice carrying that familiar tone she used when delivering news she expected me to accept without question. But Caroline's organic skincare line needed immediate capital investment, and we knew you would understand the importance of supporting family dreams. The words hit me like physical blows. Caroline's business. Of course it was about Caroline. Everything in our family had always been about Caroline. We sold the house in Sacramento for $320,000. My father added proudly, as if this announcement should fill me with admiration for their sacrifice. Caroline assured us the return on investment would be substantial within the first year. She has such vision, such entrepreneurial spirit. I stepped aside to let them enter my modest 2-bedroom apartment, my mind racing as I processed the magnitude of their decision. They had sold the 4-bedroom house where I grew up, the home they had owned for 28 years, to fund another one of my sister's ventures. "Where exactly is Caroline now?" I asked, though something cold in my stomach already knew the answer would not be good. My parents exchanged a look that lasted just long enough to confirm my suspicions. Harold cleared his throat, and Susan busied herself examining my living room furniture as if she had never seen a couch before. "Well, there have been some unexpected complications with the product launch," Harold admitted reluctantly. "Some customers experienced adverse reactions to the skincare formulations. Nothing serious, of course, just sensitive skin issues that Caroline is working diligently to resolve." The careful way he spoke those words told me everything I needed to know. This was not a minor setback. This was a complete disaster. "What kind of adverse reactions?" I pressed, settling into my favorite armchair while my parents remained standing awkwardly near their mountain of luggage. Susan finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "There were some lawsuits filed. Apparently, several customers required medical treatment for severe allergic reactions. The entire product line had to be recalled within 2 weeks of launching." 2 weeks. They had sold their house to fund a business that lasted exactly 14 days. "And where is Caroline during all of this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "She had to leave town quickly." Harold explained, his voice growing smaller with each word. "The legal pressures were overwhelming. She needed space to regroup and develop a strategy for handling the situation." Translation: Caroline had disappeared the moment things went wrong, leaving our parents holding the bag for her failed venture. "So let me understand this correctly," I said, slowly needing to hear the full truth spoken aloud. "You sold your house, gave Caroline every penny, her business failed catastrophically within 2 weeks. She fled town to avoid the consequences. And now you are expecting to live here indefinitely while she figures out her next move." The silence that followed confirmed everything. My parents had sacrificed their security, their home, their future, all for Caroline's latest scheme. And now they stood in my living room with 7 suitcases and no backup plan. "It's only temporary," Susan said quickly, her voice rising with desperation. Just until Caroline gets back on her feet. You know how resilient she is, how creative. She'll think of something. That was when I delivered my own devastating news. I can't help you, I said quietly. Even if I wanted to, I physically cannot house you here. I lost my marketing job at Brennan and Associates 3 weeks ago. My lease on this apartment expires tomorrow morning, and I'm moving into a studio apartment that's 1/3 this size. The color drained from both their faces as the true scope of our collective situation became clear. They had nowhere to go, no money left, and their backup plan had just evaporated completely. The silence stretched between us until Harold finally exploded with the question that had been building since I delivered my news. How could you not tell us you lost your job? He demanded, his face flushing red with indignation. How could you keep something that important from your family? The irony of his words hit me like a slap across the face. Here was a man who had just sold his house without consulting me, given away his life savings to my sister without asking my opinion, and expected to move into my home without advance notice, now angry that I had not shared my personal struggles with them. The same way you kept your decision to sell the house from me, I replied evenly, the same way Caroline kept the business failure from you until it was too late to change anything. We all have information we choose not to share. Susan stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her as if she were praying. Dina, please don't be like this. We're family. We need to support each other during difficult times. Those words unleashed 32 years of suppressed frustration. Support each other. What a beautiful concept that had never once applied to me in this family. Support each other, I repeated slowly. Like when Caroline and I both wanted piano lessons when we were 8 years old, and you bought her a grand piano while telling me lessons were too expensive. My parents looked genuinely surprised that I remembered that particular injustice. Or like when we both turned 16 and Caroline received a brand new Honda Civic while I got a used bicycle from a garage sale. That was different, Harold protested weakly. Caroline's grades were exceptional that year. My grades were better than hers, I shot back, but somehow that never seemed to matter. Susan's voice grew defensive. We always tried to be fair to both of you girls. Fair. The word came out as a bitter laugh. You paid Caroline's full tuition at Northwestern University while I worked 3 jobs to afford community college classes. When Caroline needed a down payment for her first house, you refinanced this house to help her. When I needed help with medical bills after my car accident 2 years ago, you told me you were experiencing financial hardship. The memories poured out of me like water through a broken dam. Every instance of favoritism, every time Caroline's needs took precedence over mine, every moment when I was made to feel like the consolation prize child. And now, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. You have given Caroline every penny of your security, lost your home, and your first instinct is to burden me with the consequences of choices I had no part in making. Harold's face was growing redder by the minute. Caroline needed that support. She's building something important, something that could benefit the whole family. What about what I needed? I asked. What about the support I could have used when I was struggling to build my career, when I was paying for my own education, when I was trying to recover from my accident? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. What I needed had never been a priority in this family. This is different, Susan insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Caroline's situation was urgent. And my situation isn't urgent. I gestured around my apartment, which was already half packed into boxes for tomorrow's move. I'm about to be homeless too, but somehow that doesn't merit the same concern as Caroline's business venture. That was when Susan made a mistake that changed everything. In her desperation to justify their choices, she revealed something they had not intended to tell me. We've already contacted Caroline's creditors, she blurted out. We told them that you would help settle the remaining business debts since families should stick together during crisis situations. The words hit me like ice water. Not only had they sacrificed their own financial security for Caroline, but they had volunteered mine as well, without asking, without even telling me. You did what? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Harold shot Susan a look that could have killed, but the damage was already done. We may have mentioned that Caroline has family support, he said carefully, clearly trying to minimize what Susan had revealed. You promised strangers that I would pay Caroline's business debts. The truth was even worse than I had imagined. Not only were my parents expecting indefinite housing and support, but they had already committed me to financial obligations I had never agreed to take on. We thought you would want to help, Susan said desperately. We thought family loyalty meant something to you. Family loyalty, the concept that had been used to manipulate and control me for my entire life, the excuse for every unfair decision, every instance of favoritism, every time my needs were dismissed in favor of Caroline's wants. Family loyalty, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call selling your house without consulting the family member you plan to burden with the consequences? Is that what you call volunteering my money to pay for a business venture I never supported? The confrontation had reached a breaking point. My parents stood surrounded by their luggage, facing the reality that their favorite daughter had abandoned them, and their backup plan was rejecting them. And I was facing the reality that my entire relationship with my parents had been built on the assumption that I would always be available to clean up the messes created by their devotion to my sister. Harold straightened his shoulders and assumed the authoritative posture he had used throughout my childhood whenever he wanted to end an argument through intimidation rather than reason. Dana Marie. He began using my full name in that particular tone that had always made me feel like a scolded child. I think you need to take a step back and remember what family means. But I was no longer the little girl who could be silenced by a stern voice and a disapproving look. I was a 32-year-old woman who had just lost her job and was about to lose her apartment, and I was tired of being treated like a supporting character in my own family's story. Please enlighten me about what family means, I replied calmly, because apparently it means something different to each of us. Susan moved closer to Harold, and they presented a united front that I had seen countless times before. It was the same formation they had used when explaining why Caroline deserved special treatment, why her needs took precedence, why I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention remained after they had lavished everything on their golden child. Family means sacrifice, Harold pronounced solemnly. Family means putting the needs of your loved ones before your own comfort. Family means loyalty even when times are difficult. Those are beautiful words, I acknowledged. Have you ever applied them to your relationship with me? The question seemed to genuinely confuse them, as if the idea that family obligations might flow in both directions had never occurred to them. We have always provided for you, Susan protested. We gave you a home and education opportunities to succeed. You provided the bare minimum legal requirements for raising a child, I corrected. Everything beyond that went to Caroline. Every opportunity, every advantage, every bit of extra support was reserved for your favorite daughter. Harold's face flushed darker, and I could see him reaching the end of his patience with what he clearly viewed as unreasonable defiance from someone who should be grateful and compliant. If that's how you really feel, he said slowly, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, then perhaps it's time for you to make a choice. Here it came. The ultimate manipulation tactic they had used throughout my childhood, the nuclear option designed to force compliance through fear of abandonment. You can choose to support your family during our time of need. Harold continued, his voice growing more commanding with each word. Or you can choose to be selfish and turn your back on the people who raised you and loved you. Susan picked up the thread seamlessly, as if they had rehearsed this speech. If you choose to abandon us now when we need you most, then you are choosing to abandon this family permanently. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been building for decades. They were offering me an ultimatum designed to terrorize me into submission, support them unconditionally, or lose them forever. We will have no choice but to remove you from our will. Harold added, clearly believing this consequence would devastate me. We will tell our relatives and friends that you abandoned your parents in their hour of greatest need. We will have no relationship with you going forward. Susan's voice cracked with manufactured emotion. Is that really what you want? To be the daughter who turned her back on her family when they needed her most? They stood there, waiting for me to crumble, to beg for forgiveness, to promise that I would do anything to maintain their love and approval. This manipulation tactic had worked for 32 years, controlling my choices and keeping me compliant with their favoritism. But something had shifted inside me during this conversation. Maybe it was the shock of learning they had volunteered my money to Caroline's creditors. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of decades of being treated as less important than my sister. Maybe it was the simple exhaustion of trying to earn love from people who had already decided where their loyalty belonged. You know what? I said quietly, and my calm tone seemed to surprise them more than shouting would have. I accept your ultimatum. The words clearly were not what they had expected to hear. Susan blinked rapidly, while Harold's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. I choose to abandon this family permanently. I continued feeling a strange sense of relief as I spoke the words aloud. If being disowned is the consequence of refusing to sacrifice my financial future for Caroline's mistakes, then I accept that consequence. Susan made a sound like a wounded animal. Dina, you don't mean that. I absolutely mean it, I replied, and discovered that I truly did. Being disowned by people who have never prioritized my well-being might be the healthiest thing that has ever happened to me. The shock on their faces was complete. In 32 years, I had never called their bluff. I had never rejected their emotional manipulation. I had never chosen my own well-being over their demands. You cannot be serious, Harold sputtered, his authority crumbling as he realized his ultimate threat held no power over me. I am completely serious, I confirmed. You want to know what I learned about being selfish and heartless? I learned it by watching you treat me like a secondary consideration for 3 decades. I learned it by observing how you prioritize one daughter over another. I learned it by experiencing what it feels like to always come second in my own family. Susan began crying, but even her tears felt manipulative after everything that had been said. How can you be so cold? She demanded through her sobs. How can you care so little about family? I care deeply about family, I replied. That's why I'm ending my participation in this dysfunctional version of it. Harold gathered himself for one final attempt at control. If we leave here tonight, we will never come back. This will be your last chance to do the right thing. Then I guess this is goodbye, I said, walking to the door and opening it wide. They stood there for a long moment, clearly still expecting me to change my mind, to beg them to stay, to promise I would comply with their demands if they would just forgive me. Instead, I held the door open and waited. Finally, Harold grabbed 2 of the suitcases and Susan took a third, and they walked out of my apartment and my life, leaving 4 suitcases behind in their haste to make a dramatic exit. Don't expect us to come crawling back, Harold called over his shoulder as they headed toward the elevator. I won't, I replied and closed the door behind them. I spent the next 4 hours in a strange state of emotional numbness, mechanically continuing to pack my belongings for tomorrow's move while trying to process what had just happened. The 4 abandoned suitcases sat in my living room like monuments to my parents' shocked departure, filled with possessions they had been too flustered to retrieve in their rush to deliver their final dramatic statements. Part of me felt hollow, as if something essential had been carved out of my chest. These were my parents, the people who had raised me, and I had just accepted their offer to permanently sever our relationship. another part of me felt strangely lighter, as if an enormous weight I had been carrying for decades had suddenly been lifted from my shoulders. I was folding my winter clothes into a box when the knocking started, tentative at first, then more insistent. I glanced at the clock on my kitchen wall, 12:43 in the morning. Through my peephole, I could see Harold and Susan standing in the hallway. Their earlier confidence had evaporated completely. Susan's makeup was streaked with tears, and Harold's shoulders sagged with defeat. I opened the door but did not invite them inside. "We need to talk," Harold said quietly, his authoritative tone completely absent. "I thought we had finished talking," I replied. "I thought you were never coming back." Susan stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her like a penitent supplicant. "Please, Dana, we made a mistake. We spoke out of anger and hurt." The desperation in her voice was unlike anything I had ever heard from either of my parents. Throughout my childhood, they had always spoken from positions of authority and control. Now they stood before me as broken people with nowhere else to turn. "What happened?" I asked, though their defeat was so complete I could already guess the answer. Harold's voice cracked as he began to explain. "We called your Aunt Linda in Phoenix. She said she could not take us in because we still owe her $3,000 from when Caroline needed help with her last business venture 2 years ago. Of course, Caroline's previous failures had already burned bridges throughout our extended family. We tried your Uncle Robert." Susan continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He reminded us that we borrowed $5,000 from him 18 months ago to help Caroline with her down payment on that condo she ended up losing to foreclosure." The pattern was becoming clear. Caroline had not just destroyed my parents' financial security, she had systematically damaged relationships throughout our entire family by using their love and trust as tools for financial manipulation. "We called our friends the Hendersons," Harold added reluctantly. "Margaret told us she could not help because we had already asked them for a loan last year when Caroline needed emergency funds for her previous skincare consulting business." I remembered that business. It had lasted approximately 6 weeks before Caroline moved on to her next venture, leaving behind a trail of angry clients and unpaid debts. "Yeah, but we tried to get a hotel room," Susan said through fresh tears, "but we only have $437 left in our checking account after helping Caroline with her immediate expenses last week." Even in their moment of complete desperation, they were still giving Caroline money. Even after her business had failed, her products had caused injuries, and she had disappeared without a trace, they had continued sending her financial support. "So where have you been for the past 4 hours?" I asked. "They sitting in the car in your parking garage." Harold admitted, his shame evident in every word, trying to figure out what to do next. They looked older somehow, as if the events of this evening had aged them beyond their 63 and 59 years. The confident parents who had arrived earlier expecting immediate compliance and gratitude had been replaced by frightened people facing the consequences of choices they were only beginning to understand. "We were wrong," Susan said quietly. "We spoke harshly to you when you were facing your own difficulties. We made assumptions about your ability to help without considering your circumstances." It was not quite an apology, but it was closer than I had ever received from either of them. "We would like to ask for your forgiveness," Harold added formally, as if he were delivering a prepared statement. "And we would like to ask for temporary shelter while we figure out our next steps." The irony was devastating. Even if their request had been reasonable, even if I had been willing to help, even if we had been able to repair the damage done to our relationship tonight, I was no longer in a position to offer assistance. "I meant what I said earlier," I told them gently. "My lease expires in 7 hours. I'm moving into a 400-square-foot studio apartment with a strict no-guest policy for the first 6 months. Even if I wanted to help you, I physically cannot." The hope that had flickered in their eyes died completely. "We have nowhere to go," Susan whispered, and for the first time in my life, I heard my mother sound completely helpless. Standing in my doorway at nearly 1 o'clock in the morning, looking at my parents' defeated faces, I realized that Caroline had not just scammed them out of their money. She had destroyed their entire support system, burned their relationships, and left them isolated with no resources and no options. And tomorrow morning, I would be moving into a new apartment while they sat in a parking garage with 4 suitcases trying to figure out how to survive on $437 and no place to sleep. Sleep proved impossible after my parents left to return to their car in the parking garage. I sat surrounded by moving boxes, staring at the 4 abandoned suitcases they had left behind my mind, racing with questions that demanded answers. Something about Caroline's business failure felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly timed with their arrival at my doorstep. At 3:15 in the morning, I opened my laptop and began searching for information about Caroline's organic skincare company. What I discovered in the following hours shattered everything I thought I knew about my sister. The business registration documents were easy to find through the California Secretary of State website. Radiant Botanicals LLC had been registered 3 months ago with Caroline listed as the sole proprietor. But the address listed for the company was not a laboratory or manufacturing facility. It was a luxury apartment complex in Beverly Hills with monthly rents starting at $4,000. Social media told an even more disturbing story. While Caroline had been telling our parents she was working 18-hour days developing revolutionary skincare formulations, her Instagram account showed a very different reality. Photos from the past 3 months revealed European vacation destinations, vineyards in Tuscany, beaches in Santorini, cafes in Paris, museums in Barcelona. Each post was carefully crafted to suggest a successful businesswoman living her best life. Designer handbags worth thousands of dollars, 5-star restaurant meals, first-class airline lounges, luxury hotel suites with breathtaking views. The timestamps on these posts corresponded exactly with the period when she was supposedly working around the clock on product development. I scrolled through credit card statements I found tucked into my parents' belongings documents they had left behind in their hasty departure. The evidence was damning. $320,000 had been transferred from their house sale directly into Caroline's business account, but instead of laboratory equipment or raw materials, the money had funded designer clothes, expensive dinners, luxury car lease payments, and international travel. The pattern became clearer as I dug deeper. Caroline had not just misused the money, she had never intended to create a legitimate business at all. The skincare company was elaborate theater designed to extract maximum financial support from our parents while funding an extravagant lifestyle. I found records of a single product order, 50 bottles of generic moisturizer purchased from a wholesale beauty supplier for $300. Caroline had relabeled these bottles as revolutionary organic anti-aging serum and sold them for $60 each through a hastily constructed website. When customers experienced allergic reactions to ingredients Caroline had not properly researched, she simply shut down the website and disappeared. The business had never been real. The product recalls, the lawsuits, the regulatory complications Caroline claimed to be handling were all fabricated excuses to explain why she needed more money and why she could not return home to face questions about her progress. By 5:30 in the morning, I had assembled a complete picture of Caroline's deception. She had spent 3 months living like a millionaire on our parents' life savings, while spinning elaborate lies about business challenges and product development setbacks. When the money ran low and the pressure for results increased, she had staged the business failure and fled. The most recent credit card charge was from yesterday, a luxury resort in Maui. While our parents sat in a parking garage with nowhere to go, Caroline was sipping cocktails by the ocean, posting photos with captions like, "Living my best life, family drama free." As the sun began rising through my apartment windows, I realized my sister was not just irresponsible or unlucky. She was a calculated predator who had systematically destroyed our parents' security while living extravagantly at their expense. Every phone call about business challenges had been carefully orchestrated manipulation. Every request for additional funding had been designed to extract maximum money with minimum accountability. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and heartbreaking. My parents had not just made a poor investment decision, they had been deliberately and methodically robbed by their own daughter, someone they trusted implicitly and supported unconditionally. But would they believe the evidence when I showed it to them, or would their devotion to Caroline prove stronger than their willingness to face uncomfortable truths? At 7:30 in the morning, Harold and Susan knocked on my door again. They looked like people who had not slept, sitting in a car all night wrestling with the magnitude of their situation. Their clothes were wrinkled, their faces drawn with exhaustion, and their eyes held the desperate hope that somehow their circumstances had magically improved overnight. "We've been thinking," Harold began carefully, his voice hoarse from fatigue. "Maybe there's some way we can work together to solve this situation. Maybe we can all help each other." I invited them inside and gestured toward the couch while I retrieved my laptop and the printed documents I had compiled during my sleepless night. "Before we discuss solutions," I said gently, "I need to show you something about Caroline's business." Susan immediately tensed, her protective instincts engaging even in the face of their desperate circumstances. "Dina, please don't start attacking Caroline again. She's dealing with enough stress without her family turning against her." The loyalty in her voice was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Even after everything that had happened, even facing homelessness, because of Caroline's choices, Susan's first instinct was still to defend her favorite daughter. "I'm not attacking anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm sharing information that I think you need to see." I opened my laptop and turned it toward them, displaying Caroline's Instagram account from the past 3 months. The screen filled with images of luxury and leisure that contradicted everything Caroline had told them about her business struggles. Harold squinted at the photos, his forehead creasing with confusion. "I don't understand. When were these taken?" I clicked on the first image, a photo of Caroline sitting by an infinity pool overlooking the Mediterranean, champagne glass, in hand designer sunglasses reflecting the azure water. The timestamp showed it was posted 6 weeks ago. "This was taken the same week she called you asking for additional funding for laboratory equipment," I explained quietly. Susan leaned forward, studying the screen more carefully. "That doesn't mean anything. Successful business people travel. She was probably researching international markets for her products." The denial in her voice was desperate, but her eyes betrayed growing uncertainty as I scrolled through more images. Caroline in first-class airline lounges. Caroline shopping in high-end boutiques. Caroline dining at Michelin-starred restaurants. Caroline touring European vineyards while wearing clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. "This is her business research?" I asked gently, showing them a photo of Caroline getting a massage at a luxury spa in Monaco, posted the day after she had called them crying about regulatory setbacks. Harold's face began changing as the evidence accumulated. The confusion in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something that looked like dawning horror. I clicked to the California business registration documents. Her company address is listed as a luxury apartment complex in Beverly Hills. Monthly rent starts at $4,000. Then I showed them the credit card statements, highlighting the charges that told the real story: designer purchases, international flights, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants. $320,000 systematically converted from their house sale into funding for Caroline's fantasy lifestyle. The skincare products were generic moisturizers she bought wholesale for $300 and relabeled. I continued showing them the supplier invoices I had tracked down. She sold 50 bottles through a website that she shut down as soon as customers complained. There was never a real business. There were never any revolutionary formulations. There was never any intention to create a legitimate company. Susan was shaking her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. "You're wrong. You must be misunderstanding something. Caroline would never lie to us like this." But Harold had gone completely silent, staring at the screen with the expression of a man watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. I showed them the final piece of evidence, Caroline's most recent Instagram post from yesterday evening. A photo of her lounging by a resort pool in Maui, perfectly manicured toes, visible in designer sandals, holding a tropical drink with a tiny umbrella. The caption read, "Living my best life family drama-free." Sometimes you just have to cut out the negativity and focus on your own happiness. The timestamp showed it was posted at approximately the same time my parents were sitting in their car in my parking garage trying to figure out where they would sleep. "She's in Maui," I said quietly. "While you're facing homelessness, Caroline is at a luxury resort posting about how wonderful her life is without family drama." Harold's silence stretched until it became frightening. His face had gone completely white, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. Susan grabbed the laptop, scrolling frantically through the evidence as if she could somehow find an explanation that would make it all innocent. There has to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe someone else posted these photos. Maybe her account was hacked. Maybe she's attending business conferences at these locations. The desperation in her voice was painful to witness. 33 years of favoritism, of defending Caroline's every choice, of believing in her potential despite repeated failures, could not be undone by simple evidence. Susan's identity as Caroline's devoted mother was too fundamental to abandon easily. "Or look at the dates," I said, gently pointing to the timestamps. "Look at the locations. Look at the expenses on your credit card statements. Caroline spent 3 months touring Europe and living in luxury apartments while telling you she was working 18-hour days in a laboratory." Harold finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "She played us." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "She never intended to start a real business." He continued, his voice growing stronger as the full scope of the deception became clear. "She took our money and used it to fund a 3-month vacation while spinning lies about product development and regulatory challenges." Susan was still clinging to denial, but her protests were becoming weaker. Maybe she was planning to use the travel as inspiration for her products. Maybe she was networking with international suppliers. "Susan," Harold said quietly, turning to face his wife, "look at the evidence. Really look at it. Our daughter took our life savings and spent it on designer clothes and European vacations while telling us she was building our financial future." The moment when Susan's denial finally cracked was devastating to witness. Her face crumpled as 33 years of faith in Caroline collided with undeniable proof of systematic deception. "How could she do this to us?" Susan whispered, the question directed more to the universe than to either Harold or me. "How could she take everything we worked for and just throw it away on herself?" But Harold's reaction was moving in a different direction. The shock was being replaced by rage, unlike anything I had ever seen from my normally composed father. His hands were clenching into fists, and his breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. "She destroyed us," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "She took our home, our security, our future, and she destroyed us for her own pleasure." The emotional devastation of learning Caroline's true nature triggered consequences that went far beyond hurt feelings and shattered illusions. As Harold's rage built to frightening levels, his face turned an alarming shade of red, and he began clutching his chest while gasping for breath. "I can't breathe," he wheezed, leaning heavily against my kitchen counter. "Something's wrong. I can't catch my breath." Susan, still reeling from the revelation about Caroline's deception, looked at Harold with growing panic. "Harold, what's happening? What's wrong?" I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 as my father's symptoms escalated. His speech became slurred, his left arm seemed to be trembling, and one side of his face appeared to be drooping slightly. The dispatcher assured me that paramedics were on their way, but those 15 minutes felt like hours. Susan's reaction to Harold's medical crisis was equally alarming. She began hyperventilating, clutching her own chest, while repeating over and over that this could not be happening, that they could not handle any more disasters. "I can't breathe either," she gasped between rapid, shallow breaths. "My chest feels tight. Everything feels wrong." When the paramedics arrived, they immediately recognized signs of a possible stroke in Harold and severe anxiety attack in Susan. Both my parents were transported to Denver General Hospital, while I followed in my car, my mind reeling from how quickly our confrontation about Caroline had escalated into a medical emergency. The emergency department was a blur of tests, consultations, and anxious waiting. Harold was rushed for CT scans and blood work, while doctors confirmed that he had indeed suffered a mild stroke, likely triggered by the extreme emotional stress of learning about Caroline's betrayal. His speech difficulties and facial drooping were expected to improve with treatment, but the incident had left him significantly weakened. Susan's condition was diagnosed as a severe panic attack with dangerously elevated blood pressure that required immediate medication and monitoring. The emotional trauma of discovering Caroline's systematic deception had triggered a physical crisis that left her shaking and disoriented. As if the medical emergencies were not devastating enough, more bad news emerged during their hospital stay. A nurse handling their insurance verification discovered additional complications that made their situation even more desperate. "Mrs. Patterson?" the hospital financial counselor said gently as she approached Susan's bed. "We're having some issues processing your insurance claims. It appears there are some outstanding medical debts under your daughter Caroline's name that are affecting your coverage." My blood ran cold as the implications became clear. The financial counselor continued consulting her tablet with a concerned expression. "There are medical bills totaling approximately $47,000 that Caroline Patterson appears to have incurred using your insurance information. The charges are from various medical facilities across 3 states over the past 2 years." Identity theft. Caroline had not just stolen their house money. She had been using their personal information to rack up medical bills that they knew nothing about. The scope of her deception was even more extensive than I had discovered during my overnight investigation. "We never authorized any medical treatments for Caroline," Susan whispered from her hospital bed, her voice barely audible. "We haven't even spoken to her about any health issues." Harold, despite his weakened condition from the stroke, managed to ask the crucial question. "What kind of medical treatments cost $47,000? The financial counselor hesitated before answering. The charges appeared to be primarily cosmetic procedures: rhinoplasty, breast augmentation, facial reconstruction, dental veneers, elective surgeries performed at high-end medical facilities in California and Nevada. Caroline had used our parents' insurance information to fund extensive cosmetic surgery while telling them she was too busy with business development to visit home. The European vacation photos I had shown them earlier suddenly made more sense. Caroline had not just been traveling. She had been recovering from multiple surgeries designed to completely transform her appearance. The revelation hit Harold like a physical blow. Despite his compromised speech from the stroke, he struggled to form words that expressed his complete devastation. "She used us," he managed to say each word requiring enormous effort. "She used our names, our insurance, our money, everything. She turned us into victims of our own daughter." Susan's reaction was even more heartbreaking. She began crying with an intensity that alarmed the medical staff, her sobs coming in waves that seemed to drain what little strength she had left after the panic attack. How could we have been so blind? She asked through her tears. How could we not see what she was doing to us? The medical bills created another layer of financial devastation. Not only had Caroline stolen their house money and destroyed their housing security, but she had also created substantial medical debts in their names that they were now responsible for paying. The identity theft added a criminal element to their situation, but pursuing legal action seemed impossible when Carolyn had disappeared completely and was apparently living under an assumed identity in Hawaii. As I sat in the hospital waiting room while doctors monitored my parents' conditions, I realized that Caroline's betrayal went far deeper than simple greed or selfishness. She had systematically dismantled every aspect of their security, stolen their identity, along with their money, and abandoned them to face the consequences, while she enjoyed the proceeds of her crimes from a tropical paradise. The financial counselor returned with additional bad news. Because of the outstanding medical debts and insurance complications, my parents' current hospital bills would not be covered, adding thousands more dollars to their already impossible financial situation. Harold and Susan were not just homeless and broke. They were now medically compromised, legally compromised by identity theft, and facing mounting medical bills they could never hope to pay, while Caroline posted photos of her designer lifestyle from luxury resorts. The question was no longer whether they could recover from Caroline's betrayal. The question was whether they could survive it. While sitting in the hospital waiting room watching my parents' world collapse around them, I received a phone call that would change everything. The number was familiar, but I had not expected to hear from Patricia Chen, my former supervisor at Brennan and Associates, especially at 8:30 on a weekday morning. Dina. Patricia's voice carried an excitement I had rarely heard from her during my 2 years at the company. I have some unexpected news that I hope will interest you. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Given that I was currently dealing with my parents' medical emergency and our collective homelessness situation, I almost declined the call, but something in Patricia's tone suggested this might be important. I have some time, I replied, stepping into the hospital corridor for better reception. The Denver office closure turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Patricia began referring to the corporate restructuring that had eliminated my position 3 weeks earlier. The company has been planning to open a new regional headquarters in Portland, Oregon, and they specifically requested you for a senior marketing manager position. The words did not immediately make sense. I had been laid off along with 12 other employees when Brennan and Associates decided to consolidate their Colorado operations. Finding new employment had been my primary concern before my parents' crisis had overwhelmed everything else. I don't understand, I said slowly. Why would they want to rehire someone they just laid off? Patricia's laugh was genuine and warm. Remember the Morrison Industries campaign you developed last year, the one that increased their brand recognition by 37% and generated that massive uptick in sales. I remembered the campaign. It had been one of my most successful projects, requiring 6 months of intensive research and creative development to position a struggling manufacturing company as an industry leader. Well, Morrison Industries just signed a contract to become our largest client, Patricia continued. They specifically requested that you handle their account. They were so impressed with your strategic thinking and execution that they made your involvement a condition of their partnership agreement. The irony was stunning. While my life was falling apart in every possible way, my professional reputation was apparently opening doors I had not even known existed. The position comes with a 40% salary increase over your previous role, Patricia added, clearly anticipating my concerns about the financial aspects. Plus, a signing bonus of $15,000 to help with relocation costs. The company will also provide temporary housing assistance while you find a permanent place in Portland. I leaned against the hospital wall, trying to process this unexpected development. while my parents faced medical bills they could not afford and homelessness they could not resolve. "There's one more thing," Patricia said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "The position includes comprehensive health insurance that allows you to add dependents. If your parents needed medical coverage, you could include them on your policy." The timing felt surreal. Yesterday, I had been facing my own housing crisis with no job prospects. Today, I was being offered a position that could potentially solve not only my financial problems, but also provide a path to help my parents with their medical expenses. "What's the timeline?" I asked, my mind racing through the implications. "They want you to start as soon as possible," Patricia replied, "ideally within 2 weeks. I know it's a big decision, especially with everything you've been dealing with, but I wanted you to hear about the opportunity directly from me." I looked through the hospital corridor window toward the room where my parents were recovering from medical crises triggered by Caroline's betrayal. Harold was connected to monitors tracking his recovery from the stroke, while Susan was receiving medications to stabilize her blood pressure and anxiety levels. For the first time in my adult life, I had the financial means to potentially help my parents in a meaningful way. But accepting this opportunity would mean moving to Portland, leaving behind the support system I had built in Denver, and taking on the responsibility of caring for 2 people who had spent decades prioritizing my sister over me. "If Patricia," I said slowly, "this opportunity sounds incredible, but I need to be completely honest with you. My family situation has become very complicated. My parents are facing serious financial and medical difficulties, and any decision I make about employment will need to account for those responsibilities." There was a pause before Patricia responded, and when she did, her voice carried a warmth that surprised me. "Dina, I've worked with you for 2 years. I've seen how you handle pressure, how you solve problems, and how you treat people with respect, even when circumstances are difficult. Whatever complications you're facing, I'm confident you'll manage them with the same professionalism and integrity you've shown in everything else." The conversation ended with Patricia giving me 48 hours to make my decision. As I returned to my parents' hospital room, I realized I was facing a choice that would define not only my future, but also my relationship with Harold and Susan. I could accept the Portland position and offer to help them rebuild their lives, but only under conditions that ensured I would never again be taken advantage of by family members who expected sacrifice without offering respect in return. Or I could decline the opportunity and face my own uncertain future while my parents dealt with the consequences of Caroline's betrayal without any support system. For the first time in my life, I held the power to determine how my family functioned. The question was whether Harold and Susan would be willing to accept a relationship built on mutual respect, rather than one-sided obligation. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors tracking Harold's recovery. Both my parents looked fragile and defeated, aged beyond their years by the emotional and physical trauma of the past 24 hours. As I settled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair beside Susan's bed, I knew it was time to address our collective future with complete honesty. I received a job offer today. I began watching their faces carefully for reactions. A senior marketing position in Portland with a significant salary increase and full health benefits. Susan's eyes filled with hope for the first time since learning about Caroline's deception. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart. At least something good is happening during all of this chaos." Harold managed a weak smile despite his continued speech difficulties. "You deserve recognition for your talents. We're proud of you." Their responses might have warmed my heart if I had not spent the past 32 years watching them reserve their genuine pride and enthusiasm for Caroline's achievements while offering me polite acknowledgement at best. The position would allow me to add dependents to my health insurance policy. I continued observing how this information affected them. It would also provide me with sufficient income to potentially help with housing and basic living expenses for family members who needed support. The hope in their expressions intensified, and I could see them beginning to envision a solution to their desperate circumstances. However, I said, my voice taking on a more serious tone, if I'm going to accept this position and offer to help rebuild our family relationships, I need to establish some ground rules that protect all of us from repeating the mistakes that led to this crisis. Harold and Susan exchanged glances, clearly uncertain where this conversation was heading. "What kind of ground rules?" Susan asked cautiously. I had spent the morning thinking through exactly this question while they underwent medical tests. If I was going to extend myself financially and emotionally for people who had spent decades treating me as a secondary priority, I needed guarantees that this sacrifice would not be taken for granted or exploited. First, I began retrieving a legal pad from my purse where I had written my conditions. You must sign legal documents acknowledging that Caroline's debts, medical bills, and any future financial obligations are not my responsibility under any circumstances. This condition was non-negotiable. I would not allow them to volunteer my resources for Caroline's benefit ever again. Second, you must commit to attending family therapy sessions to address the favoritism patterns that have damaged our relationships for decades. This means acknowledging that your treatment of Caroline and me has been fundamentally unequal and working to develop healthier family dynamics. Susan looked uncomfortable with this requirement, but Harold nodded slowly, perhaps recognizing how their favoritism had contributed to Caroline's sense of entitlement and ultimate betrayal. Third, you must agree to contribute to your own support by finding part-time employment appropriate for your ages and abilities. I will not enable dependence or laziness. This condition reflected my determination that any help I provided would be temporary assistance toward independence, not permanent subsidization of people who chose not to work. Fourth, you must commit to a 6-month timeline for achieving financial independence with clear monthly milestones for progress. I will help you get back on your feet, but I will not support you indefinitely. I had watched too many families destroy themselves through open-ended financial support that removed incentives for self-sufficiency. Fifth, you must agree to permanently cut Caroline from your lives with no future financial support, no communication, and no possibility of reconciliation unless she makes full restitution for her crimes and demonstrates sustained change over multiple years. This was perhaps the most difficult condition, but also the most essential. Caroline's ability to manipulate them had been the root cause of their current crisis. And finally, I concluded, looking directly at both of them, you must acknowledge that I am making this offer out of compassion, not obligation. If you violate any of these conditions, if you attempt to manipulate or guilt me into providing more than I've agreed to, or if you prioritize Caroline's needs over these agreements in any way, my support ends immediately and permanently. The silence that followed was lengthy and uncomfortable. Susan looked as though she wanted to protest several of the conditions, particularly those involving Caroline and therapy. Harold appeared to be weighing the terms against their alternatives, which were essentially non-existent. "These conditions seem rather strict," Susan finally said, her voice carrying a hint of the old entitlement. "We're your parents. Family shouldn't come with such rigid requirements." I had anticipated this response. Family also shouldn't involve selling your house to fund one child's fraud while expecting the other child to clean up the mess. Family shouldn't involve volunteering someone's money without their consent. Family shouldn't involve 32 years of systematic favoritism followed by demands for unconditional support. Harold spoke up, his stroke-affected speech careful but clear. "She's right, Susan. We have no position to negotiate from. Dina doesn't owe us anything after how we've treated her." This acknowledgement was more than I had ever expected to hear from either parent. You're offering us a chance to rebuild our lives and our relationship with you. Harold continued, addressing me directly. These conditions protect you from being exploited the way we allowed Caroline to exploit us. They're reasonable safeguards. Susan still looked resistant, particularly to the requirements about Caroline and therapy. What if Caroline contacts us asking for help? She asked quietly. What if she's in real trouble and needs her family? This question revealed exactly why the conditions were necessary. Even after everything Caroline had done, even facing homelessness and medical debt because of her deception, Susan's instinct was still to protect and enable her favorite daughter. Then you refer her to the police since she's committed multiple felonies, I replied firmly, or you choose to help her and forfeit my support, but you cannot do both. The choice I was presenting was stark, but necessary. They could have a relationship with me based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries, or they could continue enabling Caroline's destructive behavior, but they could not have both. Harold reached for Susan's hand, his voice gentle but decisive. We accept your conditions, Dana. All of them. We want the chance to rebuild our relationship with you, and we want to become the parents you deserve to have all along. Susan's agreement was more reluctant, but she nodded her consent. As I prepared to call Patricia and accept the Portland position, I realized I was about to embark on the most challenging relationship experiment of my life. Could people who had spent decades operating from dysfunctional patterns actually change? Could Harold and Susan learn to treat me as an equal rather than a safety net? Could I learn to trust them after a lifetime of being their second choice? The next 6 months would determine whether our family could be rebuilt on a foundation of respect and accountability, or whether some damage was simply too extensive to repair. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the spacious 2-bedroom apartment I had rented in Portland's Pearl District, watching Harold and Susan examine their new temporary home with expressions of cautious gratitude. The move had gone more smoothly than expected, thanks to Patricia's assistance with corporate relocation services and my parents' newfound willingness to follow directions without argument. Harold's recovery from the stroke had progressed well with consistent medical treatment, though he still spoke more slowly than before and tired easily. Susan's anxiety remained manageable with medication and regular therapy sessions. Most importantly, both of them had begun demonstrating behaviors I had never seen before: accountability, appreciation, and genuine effort to change. My new position at Brennan and Associates exceeded every expectation. The Portland office was modern and collaborative. My colleagues welcomed my experience with enthusiasm, and the Morrison Industries account provided exactly the kind of creative challenge I thrived on. For the first time in years, I felt professionally valued and intellectually stimulated. The apartment I had chosen reflected my commitment to this fresh start. Large windows filled the space with natural light. The open floor plan encouraged conversation rather than isolation, and the second bedroom provided my parents with privacy while maintaining clear boundaries about shared versus personal space. "This is beautiful, Dana," Susan said quietly, running her hand along the granite kitchen counter. "Thank you for giving us this chance to start over." Harold nodded from his position on the living room couch, where he was reviewing job postings for part-time positions suitable for someone with his construction experience and current physical limitations. "I found 3 potential opportunities," he announced, holding up printouts from his laptop search. 2 hardware stores looking for customer service associates with building knowledge, and a home improvement consultation company that needs someone to provide estimates for renovation projects. This level of initiative represented a dramatic departure from the Harold White had known throughout my childhood. The man who had spent decades expecting others to solve his problems was actively researching ways to contribute to his own recovery. Susan had made similar progress. She had enrolled in a computer skills class at the local community college and was volunteering at a senior center while searching for paid employment opportunities. The volunteer coordinator mentioned they might have a part-time administrative position opening next month, she reported during dinner preparation. The work involves scheduling basic bookkeeping and coordinating activities for elderly residents. Their efforts to rebuild their lives were genuine and sustained, but I remained cautious about declaring success too early. Decades of dysfunctional patterns could not be erased in 2 weeks, regardless of how motivated people appeared to be. That caution proved wise when Caroline made her first attempt to re-establish contact. The message arrived through Facebook on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing marketing proposals for the Morrison account. A string of desperate communications that began with apologies and quickly escalated to demands. Dina, I know things have been complicated lately, but I'm in serious trouble and need your help immediately. The first message read, I can't reach Mom and Dad, and I'm hoping you can help me get in touch with them. I screenshot the message and continued reading without responding. I know you're probably angry about the business situation, but there were circumstances beyond my control that led to the complications. I never intended for anyone to get hurt financially. The euphemisms were typical, Caroline. Business situation instead of fraud, complications instead of theft, circumstances beyond my control instead of deliberate deception. I'm currently dealing with some dangerous people who are threatening me over money I owe them. If I don't come up with $50,000 within the next week, they're going to seriously hurt me. This message revealed Caroline's strategy: create urgency through claims of physical danger, appeal to family loyalty, through suggestions of mortal peril, and demand a specific amount of money to resolve the manufactured crisis. The messages continued throughout the evening, becoming increasingly frantic as I refused to respond. Please don't ignore me when I'm in real danger. These people know where I'm staying, and they've made it clear what will happen if I don't pay them back soon. I know our family has had disagreements, but surely you wouldn't want something terrible to happen to your only sister over money. Mom and Dad would never forgive you if you had the chance to save me and chose not to help. The final message arrived at 11:30 that night. I'm going to have to do something desperate if my family abandons me. I hope you can live with the consequences. I shared the screenshots with Harold and Susan the following morning, watching their faces carefully as they processed Caroline's latest manipulation attempt. Susan's initial reaction was exactly what I had feared. Her face went pale and her hands began shaking as she read about Caroline's alleged danger. What if she's really in trouble? Susan asked, her voice tight with worry. What if these threats are real? This was the test I had been anticipating. Would my parents choose to honor their commitment to cutting Caroline from their lives, or would they revert to their old patterns of rescue and enabling at the first sign of manufactured crisis? Harold surprised me by taking the lead in addressing Susan's concerns. Look at the language she's using, he said, pointing to specific phrases in the messages. Dangerous people, threatening me over money, serious consequences. This is exactly the same manipulation tactic she used when she needed money for the skincare business. Susan still looked uncertain, torn between her commitment to our new arrangement and her lifelong compulsion to protect Caroline. But what if this time it's real, she persisted. What if she's actually in danger and we ignore her? I had anticipated this question and prepared my response carefully. Caroline is supposedly in Maui, staying at luxury resorts and posting photos of her designer lifestyle, I reminded them. If she's really being threatened by dangerous people, she can contact local law enforcement for protection. She can return to the mainland and enter a women's shelter if she needs safety. She has multiple options that don't involve stealing more money from family members. Harold nodded firmly. Dina's right. If Caroline is genuinely in danger, there are legitimate resources available to help her. She doesn't need to manipulate us into sending money. But Susan's resolve was wavering, and I could see her beginning to rationalize reasons why Caroline's situation might be different. Why family loyalty might require making an exception to our agreement. The next 48 hours would determine whether the progress we had made could withstand Caroline's calculated assault on their emotions. Caroline's desperation escalated dramatically when her social media messages failed to generate the response she expected. On Monday morning, I was reviewing quarterly projections with Patricia when our receptionist announced that I had a visitor in the lobby who claimed to be my sister and was demanding to speak with me immediately. My blood ran cold as I realized Caroline had somehow tracked down my new workplace and was preparing to create a public confrontation designed to pressure me through professional embarrassment. "Tell her I'm in meetings all day and cannot be disturbed." I instructed the receptionist, hoping Caroline would simply leave when denied immediate access. But Caroline had not traveled from Hawaii to Portland to be easily deterred. Within minutes, I could hear raised voices coming from the lobby area, growing louder and more dramatic by the moment. "I need to speak with my sister right now." Caroline's voice carried clearly through the office space, pitched at a level designed to attract maximum attention. "This is a family emergency, and I'm not leaving until someone gets Dina for me." Patricia looked at me with concern. "Do you want me to call security?" Before I could answer, Caroline's voice escalated to near shouting levels. "Dina has stolen my inheritance money and is holding my parents hostage in some kind of cult-like situation," she announced to the increasingly uncomfortable lobby full of clients and employees. "I'm here to rescue them from my sister's psychological manipulation." The accusations were so outrageous and delivered with such theatrical intensity that I realized Caroline was attempting to create a scene so disruptive that I would agree to meet with her just to stop the public humiliation. "She's brainwashed our elderly parents against their innocent daughter and convinced them that I'm some kind of criminal," Caroline continued, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I just want my family back." I could hear murmurs of concern from other office workers, and I knew Caroline's performance was beginning to generate exactly the kind of sympathy and confusion she intended to create. Patricia stood up decisively. "I'm calling building security immediately. This is completely inappropriate behavior in a professional setting." But as we watched through the office window, Caroline's strategy became even more calculated. She had positioned herself in the lobby where her dramatic performance would be witnessed by the maximum number of people, and she was clearly prepared to maintain this disruption indefinitely until I capitulated to her demands. "All I'm asking for is 5 minutes with my sister," she proclaimed tearfully. 5 minutes to explain that our parents are being manipulated by someone who has turned them against their own daughter. The security guard who arrived seemed uncertain how to handle someone who was technically not trespassing, but was creating significant disruption through emotional manipulation rather than physical aggression. That was when Patricia surprised me by leaving the office and walking directly into the lobby to confront Caroline herself. "Excuse me," Patricia said in her most professional voice. "I'm Dana's supervisor, and I need you to know that your behavior is being recorded by building security cameras." Caroline's demeanor shifted instantly when she realized she was being observed by someone in authority who was not falling for her emotional manipulation. "The transformation in your behavior between entering this building and beginning your performance is clearly visible on surveillance footage," Patricia continued calmly. "You were composed and purposeful when you arrived, then became hysterical the moment you began making accusations. This suggests calculated manipulation rather than genuine distress." The accuracy of Patricia's observation seemed to catch Carolyn off guard. Her theatrical crying stopped abruptly as she realized her performance was being analyzed rather than believed. "I don't know what you mean," Caroline said, but her voice had lost its desperate edge and returned to normal conversational levels. "See, security footage shows you checking your appearance in the lobby mirrors, practicing facial expressions, and timing your emotional outbursts to coincide with maximum foot traffic through this area," Patricia replied matter-of-factly. "This appears to be a deliberate attempt to manipulate your sister through public embarrassment." The other people in the lobby were now watching this exchange with fascination rather than sympathy, and Caroline seemed to realize that her strategy had backfired completely. Furthermore, Patricia added, "Your accusations about inheritance theft and parental manipulation are serious allegations that should be reported to appropriate authorities if they're genuine. The fact that you're making these claims in an office lobby rather than to police suggests they lack credibility." Caroline's face flushed red as she realized she had been completely outmaneuvered by someone who understood manipulation tactics better than she did. "I just want to talk to my sister," she said weakly, her dramatic persona crumbling under Patricia's professional scrutiny. "Your sister is at work contributing value to her clients and colleagues," Patricia replied. "If you have legitimate family business to discuss, you can contact her through appropriate personal channels during non-business hours." The security guard stepped forward at this point, making it clear that Caroline needed to leave the building immediately or face trespassing charges. As Caroline gathered herself to leave, she made one final attempt to salvage her manipulation strategy. "Tell Dana that our parents need her help and that I'm willing to work together to solve our family problems," she said loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. But Patricia had the perfect response. "I'll tell Dina that someone claiming to be her sister disrupted our workplace with false accusations and manipulative behavior, and that building security has banned this person from returning." Caroline left the building without achieving any of her objectives, but her willingness to travel from Hawaii to Portland and create a public scene demonstrated how desperate she had become to reestablish financial access to our family. As I returned to my office, I realized that Caroline's failed manipulation attempt had actually strengthened my position with my colleagues who had witnessed firsthand the kind of family dysfunction I was dealing with, and Patricia's skilled handling of the situation. But I also knew this would not be Caroline's final attempt to break down the boundaries I had established. Her desperation was escalating, and people like Caroline typically became more dangerous when their usual tactics failed to achieve results. The following morning brought an unexpected phone call that would transform our understanding of Caroline's criminal activities from a personal family tragedy into something much larger and more significant. "Ms. Patterson, this is Detective Maria Santos with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit." The caller introduced herself. "I'm hoping you can help us with an ongoing investigation involving your sister, Caroline Patterson, and her suspected involvement in a multi-state fraud operation." I nearly dropped my coffee cup as the implications of her words sank in. The FBI was investigating Caroline. "I'd be happy to help in any way I can," I replied, my mind racing with questions about how federal investigators had become involved in what I had assumed was a private family matter. "Oh, we've been tracking a sophisticated fraud network that specifically targets aging parents by exploiting family favoritism dynamics," Detective Santos explained. "Your sister appears to be a central figure in this operation, and the documentation you provided to local authorities about her activities has filled in several missing pieces of our investigation." I had forgotten about the police report I had filed regarding Caroline's identity theft of our parents' medical information. Apparently, that report had triggered federal attention because it fit a much larger pattern of criminal behavior. "How many families has she victimized?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Caroline Patterson and her associates have systematically defrauded at least 37 families across 12 states over the past 4 years," Detective Santos replied. "The total financial damage exceeds $2 million, not including medical identity theft and credit fraud." The scope was staggering. Caroline had not just destroyed our family's financial security, she was part of an organized criminal enterprise that specialized in exploiting parental love and family loyalty for profit. "The pattern is always similar," Detective Santos continued. They identify families with adult children where one child is clearly favored by the parents. Caroline befriends the favored child, then gradually takes over their identity to gain access to family resources. This revelation was horrifying. Caroline had not developed her manipulation skills through trial and error within our family. She had been trained by professional criminals who understood exactly how to exploit family dynamics for maximum financial gain. In most cases, the targeted child doesn't realize they're being used until Caroline disappears with the money, Detective Santos explained. But in your family's case, something different happened. Caroline didn't replace a favored child. She was the favored child from birth. The implications were staggering. Our family dynamics had not created Caroline's criminal behavior. Instead, Caroline's criminal associates had recognized our family's dysfunction as an ideal environment for their operation. We believe Caroline joined this fraud network approximately 5 years ago, shortly after her previous business ventures began failing consistently. Detective Santos continued. Her associates recognized that she already had unlimited access to your parents' resources and helped her develop more sophisticated methods for extracting maximum value. Everything made sense now. Caroline's sudden shift from small-scale manipulation to elaborate business schemes had not been natural evolution. She had been coached by professional criminals who taught her how to exploit our parents more effectively. The European vacations, the luxury lifestyle, the cosmetic surgeries were all funded through a network of similar family fraud operations. Detective Santos explained. Caroline and her husband have been living off the proceeds of multiple simultaneous scams targeting vulnerable families across the country. Husband. Caroline was married, another fact she had hidden from our parents, while claiming to need their support as a struggling single entrepreneur. Their operation is particularly sophisticated because they maintain detailed psychological profiles of their victims and customize their approaches based on each family's specific dysfunction patterns. Detective Santos continued, they're not random criminals, they're behavioral specialists who study family dynamics to maximize financial exploitation. The phone conversation continued for another 30 minutes, as Detective Santos explained how my documentation of Caroline's activities had provided crucial evidence for their federal case. The credit card records, social media posts, and business registration documents I had compiled were exactly what they needed to establish Caroline's role in the larger criminal enterprise. We've been building this case for 18 months, but Caroline's ability to manipulate evidence and victims has made prosecution challenging, Detective Santos admitted. Your willingness to document her activities objectively without emotional bias has given us the clear timeline we needed to prove systematic fraud rather than isolated incidents. More shocking revelations emerged as the conversation progressed. Caroline's fraud network had developed specific techniques for isolating their victims from family members who might expose their operations. They had protocols for turning family members against each other, for creating crises that prevented objective analysis of their activities, and for ensuring that victims felt too ashamed to seek help from law enforcement. The fact that your parents are now willing to cooperate with our investigation instead of protecting Caroline represents a significant breakthrough, Detective Santos explained. Most victims never reach that level of clarity about what happened to them. The federal investigation had been monitoring Caroline's activities for months, waiting for the right moment to make arrests that would capture the entire criminal network rather than just individual operators. We're planning to execute search and arrest warrants within the next 72 hours, Detective Santos informed me. Caroline and her associates are currently in Hawaii, apparently believing they're safe from prosecution because of the distance and their assumed identities. The investigation had identified Caroline's real name as Caroline Matthews, married to Robert Matthews, both of whom had been operating under multiple false identities while conducting fraud operations across the western United States. Your parents' case will be central to our prosecution because it represents the most complete documentation of their methods. Detective Santos concluded. We'll need their testimony about Caroline's systematic manipulation, but we expect full asset recovery for all victims once we complete the arrest and asset forfeiture proceedings. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Caroline's betrayal of our family was about to result in justice for dozens of other families who had suffered similar devastation. Our personal tragedy had become the key to exposing a criminal network that had destroyed lives across multiple states. But more importantly, Harold and Susan were about to learn that their daughter had not just been selfish or irresponsible. She had been a calculating predator who viewed their love and trust as tools for criminal exploitation. Detective Santos requested a meeting with Harold and Susan the following afternoon to prepare them for their role in the federal prosecution. As we sat in the FBI field office conference room, surrounded by photographs and documents chronicling Caroline's criminal network, my parents faced the devastating truth about how extensively they had been manipulated. Before we discuss Caroline's specific crimes against your family, Detective Santos began gently, I need to share some additional information about her victims that will help you understand the scope of this operation. She opened a thick file folder containing photographs and case summaries from other families Caroline had destroyed. The Hendersons in Sacramento lost their retirement savings when Caroline convinced their daughter to invest in a fake renewable energy company. Detective Santos explained, showing them photos of an elderly couple standing in front of a foreclosure notice on their home. Harold's face went pale as he recognized the name. We know the Hendersons. They're our neighbors. They told us their daughter had made some poor investment choices. Caroline orchestrated their daughter's involvement to gain access to the Henderson family's resources. Detective Santos continued. She spent 6 months befriending their daughter, then gradually took over her identity to convince the parents to invest their life savings. Susan made a sound like a wounded animal as she realized that Caroline had been systematically targeting their entire neighborhood and social circle. The next photograph showed a middle-aged man sitting in what appeared to be a hospital room. Thomas Wright in Phoenix suffered a heart attack when he discovered that his son's medical emergency was fabricated by Caroline to extract $28,000 for fake hospital bills, Detective Santos explained. His son had no idea Caroline was using his identity to defraud his father. More photographs followed, each representing a family destroyed by Caroline's systematic exploitation of parental love and trust. Margaret Foster in Denver was convinced by Caroline to refinance her home to help her nephew start a catering business. Detective Santos continued. The nephew knew nothing about the supposed business. Caroline had been impersonating him through social media and email for 3 months. Harold was gripping the edge of the conference table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. How many families? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 37 confirmed victims across 12 states, Detective Santos replied. Total documented losses exceed $2 million. But we believe there are additional victims who haven't yet realized they were targeted. Susan began crying quietly as the magnitude of Caroline's crimes became clear. The most devastating discovery, Detective Santos continued, is that Caroline specifically recruited your family because of information she gathered about your family dynamics from previous victims. This revelation hit like a physical blow. What do you mean? Susan asked through her tears. Caroline's criminal network maintains detailed profiles of potential victims, including information about family structures, financial resources, and psychological vulnerabilities, Detective Santos explained. They identified your family as an ideal target because Caroline already had unlimited access to your resources and trust. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Caroline had not gradually become a criminal. She had been recruited into criminal activity specifically because her position in our family made her an effective weapon against us. The network provided Caroline with training in advanced manipulation techniques, false business documentation, and methods for extracting maximum value from victim families. Detective Santos continued. Her European vacations were actually training sessions with other operatives learning more sophisticated fraud techniques. Harold finally found his voice, though it shook with rage and devastation. She was trained to destroy us, he said slowly, each word requiring tremendous effort. She didn't just steal our money. She was coached by professional criminals to exploit our love for her. Detective Santos nodded sadly. Your family's dysfunction created the perfect environment for their operation, but Caroline's criminal behavior was planned and executed by people who specialize in family destruction. More devastating information emerged as the briefing continued. Caroline's marriage to Robert Matthews occurred specifically to expand their criminal capabilities. Detective Santos explained. He specializes in identity theft and financial fraud, while she focuses on psychological manipulation and family infiltration. Susan looked completely broken as she processed this information. So nothing she ever told us was true, she asked desperately. None of her business ventures, none of her struggles, none of her need for our help was real. Every interaction Caroline had with your family for the past 5 years was designed to extract resources while preventing you from recognizing the fraud. Detective Santos confirmed. Her distress about business failures, her requests for emergency assistance, her promises to pay you back, her expressions of gratitude and love, all of it was scripted manipulation. The silence that followed was profound and heartbreaking. Finally, Harold spoke, his voice carrying a weight I had never heard before. We helped her destroy other families, he said quietly, by enabling her behavior, by never questioning her stories, by always providing whatever she asked for. We helped her perfect her techniques for victimizing other parents. This realization seemed to devastate him more than learning about his own victimization. The Hendersons lost their home because we taught Caroline that parents could be easily manipulated through emotional appeals. He continued, his voice growing stronger with self-condemnation. Every family she destroyed after ours was possible because we showed her how effective her methods were. Susan looked at Harold with growing horror as she understood what he was saying. We didn't just lose our own security, she whispered. We helped create a monster who went on to destroy dozens of other families. Detective Santos leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Your enablement of Caroline's early behavior may have contributed to her confidence, but you were also victims of a sophisticated criminal operation, she said. The guilt you're feeling now is exactly what this network relies on to keep victims silent and isolated. She gestured toward the photographs of other families. Every one of these families is asking themselves the same questions you're asking. They're all wondering how they could have been so blind, how they could have enabled such destruction. But Harold was not accepting comfort or rationalization. The difference is that Caroline was our daughter, he said with devastating clarity. We had 33 years to recognize her patterns and set boundaries. We chose not to see what she was, because admitting the truth would have required us to change. This acknowledgement represented a level of self-awareness I had never expected from either parent. We prioritized protecting our image of Caroline over protecting ourselves and other families. Susan added, her voice steady despite her tears. We chose comfortable lies over difficult truths, and other families paid the price for our willful blindness. As the meeting concluded, Detective Santos explained that Caroline and her husband would be arrested within 48 hours and that asset recovery proceedings would begin immediately. Based on the evidence we've compiled, we expect Caroline to receive a federal prison sentence of 15 to 20 years, she said. Her husband has indicated willingness to cooperate, in exchange for a reduced sentence, which means we'll have detailed testimony about the full scope of their criminal network. But for Harold and Susan, the legal consequences seemed less important than the moral reckoning they were facing. They had not just been victims of Caroline's crimes. They had been unwitting accomplices whose denial and enabling had helped create one of the most successful family fraud operations in FBI history. 3 days later, I was reviewing marketing reports in my Portland office when Patricia knocked on my door with news that would bring our long nightmare to a close. "Detective Santos is online too," Patricia announced. "She says she has important updates about your sister's case." I picked up the phone with anticipation and anxiety in equal measure. "Ms. Patterson, I'm calling to inform you that we executed arrest warrants this morning for Caroline Matthews and Robert Matthews at their resort location in Maui." Detective Santos began, her voice carrying satisfaction that was clearly professional rather than personal. "Both suspects are now in federal custody and have been charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit organized financial crimes." She continued, "The arrests went smoothly, and we recovered substantial evidence from their hotel suite." Relief flooded through me as I realized Caroline's ability to manipulate and harm families was finally ended. "What kind of evidence did you recover?" I asked. "Computer files containing detailed profiles of over 60 families they had targeted or were planning to target," Detective Santos replied. "Financial records showing the movement of stolen funds through multiple accounts, personal items purchased with fraud proceeds including jewelry, artwork, and luxury goods worth approximately $300,000. The scope continued to exceed everything we had imagined. More importantly," Detective Santos continued, "we recovered detailed documentation of their criminal methods, including training materials for recruiting new operatives and psychological profiles they used to identify vulnerable families. This evidence would ensure that Caroline's entire criminal network could be dismantled, rather than simply damaged by removing 2 key operatives. Robert Matthews has already agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence." Detective Santos explained, "His testimony will provide us with information about the network's leadership and methods that we couldn't have obtained otherwise." Caroline's husband had apparently decided that loyalty to his wife was less important than avoiding maximum federal prison time. "What about asset recovery for the victims?" I asked, knowing this information would be crucial for Harold and Susan's ability to rebuild their lives. "This is where we have excellent news," Detective Santos replied, and I could hear genuine excitement in her voice. "The criminal enterprise has been far more profitable than we initially estimated. Between bank accounts, real estate, luxury goods, and investment assets, we've identified recoverable funds totaling approximately $4.2 million. The amount was staggering, far exceeding the documented losses from known victims. "OAO asset forfeiture proceedings will begin immediately, and we expect victim restitution to be distributed within 6 months." Detective Santos continued, "Based on your parents' documented losses, they should recover approximately $215,000, which represents full compensation for their house sale plus additional damages for identity theft and emotional distress." This meant Harold and Susan would not only recover their original losses, but actually emerge from this ordeal in better financial condition than when it began. "The luxury goods Caroline purchased with stolen funds will be liquidated to provide additional compensation for victims," Detective Santos explained. "The European vacation expenses, designer clothing, cosmetic surgeries, and jewelry purchases can all be valued and converted to cash for victim restitution." But the legal consequences were equally satisfying. Caroline Matthews has been denied bail due to flight risk and is being held in federal custody pending trial. Detective Santos continued, "Based on the evidence we've compiled and her husband's cooperation, we expect her to receive a federal prison sentence of 18 to 22 years. The sentence would ensure Caroline could never again exploit family relationships for criminal purposes. Her husband's cooperation revealed additional crimes that weren't part of our original investigation, Detective Santos added, including tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud against federal programs. Caroline's total exposure now includes charges that could result in up to 30 years imprisonment. As the conversation concluded, Detective Santos shared one final piece of information that provided a sense of closure I had not expected. This case has become a landmark prosecution that will help other families recognize and report similar fraud operations, she explained. Your willingness to document Caroline's crimes objectively and your parents' cooperation with our investigation has created legal precedents that will protect other families from similar exploitation. Our personal tragedy had contributed to systemic changes that would help prevent other families from experiencing what we had endured. When I called Harold and Susan with the news, their reactions reflected the emotional complexity of achieving justice against someone who had once been the center of their universe. I'm grateful that other families will be protected, Harold said quietly, but I'm also mourning the daughter we thought we had. Even knowing everything we know now, it's difficult to accept that Caroline never really existed. Susan's response was more direct. I'm relieved that she can't hurt anyone else, she said firmly, and I'm grateful that we'll have enough money to rebuild our lives independently. But mostly, I'm proud that we chose to cooperate with law enforcement instead of protecting her. The woman who had spent 33 years enabling Caroline's behavior had chosen accountability over loyalty when it mattered most. As I hung up the phone, I realized that justice in this case meant more than legal consequences and financial recovery. It meant that Harold and Susan had finally chosen truth over comfortable illusions, and that their choice would help protect other families from similar devastation. Caroline's criminal career was over. Her victims would be compensated, and our family had learned to prioritize honesty over dysfunction. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Harold and Susan's new home in Beaverton, Oregon, preparing dinner while they shared updates about their continued progress toward complete independence. The modest 3-bedroom house they had purchased with their restitution funds represented more than just financial recovery. It symbolized their transformation into people who took responsibility for their choices and their future. Harold had thrived in his part-time position at Morrison Hardware, where his decades of construction experience made him invaluable to customers planning home improvement projects. His recovery from the stroke had progressed beyond medical expectations, and his speech had returned to normal clarity. More importantly, his sense of self-worth had been rebuilt through meaningful work and positive relationships with colleagues who respected his expertise. Bill Morrison asked me to consider taking over the contractor referral program, Harold announced proudly as he set the dining room table. He wants me to help customers connect with reliable professionals for projects that are beyond the do-it-yourself level. This promotion represented recognition of Harold's value based on his actual contributions rather than family obligations or sympathy for his circumstances. Susan had found similar fulfillment in her position as administrative coordinator at the Sunset Manor Senior Center. Her natural organizational abilities and genuine concern for elderly residents had made her indispensable to the facility's operations. We're implementing a new program for seniors who are at risk of financial exploitation, Susan reported while arranging fresh flowers in a centerpiece vase. I'm helping develop educational materials that teach families how to recognize manipulation tactics and protect vulnerable relatives. Her work helping other families avoid the exploitation our family had experienced provided Susan with a sense of purpose that went far beyond simple employment. Their therapy sessions had continued throughout the 6 months, evolving from crisis intervention to ongoing personal development. The favoritism patterns that had damaged our family relationships for decades were being systematically identified and changed. Dr. Rodriguez says we've made remarkable progress in recognizing our unconscious bias patterns. Susan shared as we collaborated on meal preparation. She's helped us understand how our childhood experiences with our own parents shaped our approach to raising children. This level of self-reflection represented growth I had never expected to witness from either parent. The legal resolution of Caroline's case had provided closure that allowed us to focus on building healthier relationships rather than managing ongoing crisis. Caroline had been sentenced to 22 years in federal prison after refusing a plea bargain that would have reduced her time in exchange for cooperation. Her husband's testimony had resulted in the dismantling of the entire fraud network and additional prosecutions of criminal associates across multiple states. I received a letter from Detective Santos last week. Harold mentioned as we sat down to our first family dinner in the new house. She wanted to update us on the final victim restitution distributions. All 37 identified families had received full compensation for their losses, plus additional damages for emotional distress and identity theft. The criminal enterprise's assets had provided enough funds to ensure complete recovery for every victim. More importantly, Harold continued, she said our case has been featured in FBI training materials to help agents recognize similar operations. Other families won't have to go through what we experienced. This legacy felt more meaningful than any personal recovery could have been. As we shared dinner, the conversation naturally turned to reflecting on how fundamentally our relationships had changed. The people sitting around this table bore little resemblance to the dysfunctional family that had confronted each other in my Denver apartment 6 months earlier. I need to acknowledge something that I should have said long ago. Susan began, her voice carrying the weight of decades of unspoken truths. We failed you as parents, Dina. We spent your entire childhood prioritizing Caroline's wants over your needs, and we continued that pattern into your adult life. This acknowledgement was not prompted by therapy homework or legal requirements. It came from genuine recognition of harmful patterns that had shaped our family dynamics for too long. We taught Caroline that manipulation and entitlement were acceptable ways to get what she wanted, Harold added, and we taught you that your value in this family was conditional on your willingness to sacrifice for others. Both admissions reflected understanding that went beyond simple apology to genuine accountability. You had every right to refuse to help us when we showed up at your apartment expecting immediate support after giving away our security to fund Caroline's crimes, Susan continued. The fact that you chose to help us anyway with appropriate boundaries and conditions demonstrated wisdom and compassion that we didn't deserve. The woman who had spent decades defending Caroline's behavior and minimizing my needs had developed the ability to recognize and acknowledge uncomfortable truths about our family relationships. My own transformation had been equally significant. The promotion to regional manager at Brennan and Associates had exceeded every professional goal I had set for myself. More importantly, learning to establish and maintain boundaries with family members had improved every relationship in my life. I'm proud of who we've all become, I said honestly, looking around the table at 3 people who had chosen growth over comfort, accountability over denial. We've learned to be honest with each other even when honesty is difficult. Harold raised his glass of sparkling cider in a toast. To family relationships built on truth rather than manipulation, he said solemnly. To supporting each other through accountability rather than enabling. To never again allowing one person's destructive behavior to damage everyone else's security. As we clinked glasses, I realized we had achieved something rare and valuable. We had transformed a fundamentally dysfunctional family system into relationships based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. The doorbell interrupted our celebration, and Susan returned from answering it with a large envelope marked Federal Bureau of Investigation. Inside was a formal commendation letter recognizing our family's cooperation with the landmark prosecution, along with updates on additional arrests that had resulted from the investigation. Caroline's criminal network had been completely dismantled with 15 associates now serving federal prison sentences. But the letter also contained personal messages from other victim families expressing gratitude for our willingness to pursue justice rather than hide the embarrassing details of our exploitation. Your courage in exposing the truth helped our family recover not only our financial losses, but also our sense of dignity. One letter read, "Thank you for choosing accountability over shame." As I read these messages aloud, I understood that our personal journey from dysfunction to healing had contributed to something much larger than family recovery. We had helped create systemic changes that would protect other families from similar exploitation. The evening concluded with a conversation about our hopes for the future, the first such discussion we had ever shared as a family that was not dominated by Caroline's needs or crises. Harold and Susan planned to use their remaining restitution funds to establish a small scholarship program for students who were working their way through college without family financial support. Their own experience of favoring one child over another had given them insight into the challenges faced by young people who lacked family backing for their educational goals. My plans included expanding my role at Brennan and Associates to include pro bono marketing support for nonprofit organizations that assisted victims of family financial exploitation. As I drove home to my own apartment that evening, I reflected on the profound life lesson that had emerged from our family's journey through crisis and recovery. True family loyalty does not mean protecting each other from consequences or enabling destructive behavior. Real love means holding each other accountable to become better people even when accountability is painful or uncomfortable. We had learned that supporting someone sometimes means saying no to their requests, that protecting someone sometimes means allowing them to face the results of their choices, that loving someone means prioritizing their growth over their immediate comfort. The sister I had grown up with had never actually existed. Caroline had been a carefully constructed persona designed to extract maximum resources from people who loved her. But the parents who had raised that persona had transformed into people capable of genuine love, accountability, and growth. Our family had been rebuilt on a foundation of truth rather than illusion, respect rather than manipulation, and healthy boundaries rather than toxic enabling. It had taken a devastating betrayal and criminal prosecution to teach us how to love each other properly, but the lessons we learned had created relationships that were stronger and more authentic than anything we had experienced during the decades of dysfunction. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who expected unconditional support despite harmful behavior? How did you balance loyalty with self-protection when dealing with relatives who crossed important lines? Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember to like this video if our story helped you think about your own family relationships. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building healthier connections. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of accountability in family relationships. Thank you for listening to our journey, and I hope it encourages you to prioritize truth and respect in your own family connections.